Good afternoon. My name's Jeff Whitaker. I'm with the IT security team here at UNF. I'm going to speak to you today about how to survive a ransomware attack. And the keys to that are backups and patching your computers. So without ado, we'll dump right into it. There are many threats to your data in the modern computing world. Not the least of which is ransomware, which is the subject of our talk today, but there's also other viruses and, of course, data theft from a hacker or just losing your drive, having a drive go bad, eavesdropping, and, of course, hardware failures be having your drive go bad. So ransomware is one of the most threatening and scary things in the modern world nowadays. People are really concerned about it because it can strike without much warning, and by the time you found out you've got it, it's pretty much too late if you're not prepared for it. You can see here, this is one of the ransom notes that you might see from an attack. This one is from WannaCry, and basically it's saying send us $300 or in Bitcoin, or we're not going to let you decrypt your data, and it's all gone. So that's pretty scary if you haven't prepared for this. Ransomware is on the rise. It's been increasing for the last 2-3 years. Ransomware is really kind of an extension of the good old fake antivirus extortion attempts from a few years back, 5, 6, 10 years ago. You might remember those. You would have a screen pop up and say, hey, your computer's infected. Why don't you download our program and we'll clean it off for you? And then you have to pay $40 to get their program. And really your computer probably wasn't infected at all. It was probably just a little browser hijack that got you. But because you clicked and installed it, now your computer is infected. So ransomware can spread via a couple different methods. The first one, which is the number one here at UNF, is email attachments. So when people open up an email attachment from a source that they don't know, or even from one that they do, if that attachment has malware in it, it can infect the computer. Of course, there's always drive-by downloads, and that's where you're just browsing the internet. You happen to go to a site, might be sketchy, might be a legitimate site, and because of code that's been embedded into the site, either directly or maybe through an ad, your browser gets attacked, and if it's vulnerable, it'll be compromised, and it can download the malware that way. Another popular one, this was even more popular with the fake AV stuff, but is fake updates. So when you browse a website and you go to, say, facebook.com, and then all of a sudden you get a window that says, hey, you need to update your Flash player so this page will display correctly. 9 times out of 10, that's going to be bogus. You don't need to do that. And if you ever get a prompt like this, you need to just close that browser window. And if you're really concerned about it, go ahead and go back to the Flash website or whoever it is that they said needs updating and see if you're due for an update. And if you are, if you get it from the manufacturer of the program and not from the website you're on, you're pretty much guaranteed to be safe. But not just Flash. I pick on it because it's obvious, but you'll also see websites that say, hey, your Windows is out of date. And websites have nothing to do with that aside from the Windows Update website. And then fonts, that's another popular one. The browser will say, hey, you need to install this font pack. Well, yeah, I mean, unless you're browsing a Chinese website or something where your computer doesn't likely have the font installed, it's pretty unlikely that your browser can't render the page without it. So those are usually a bogus attempt to get you to download malware as well. Just a quick note, email safety is key for stopping a lot of these attacks because, like I said, most of them come through email attachments. So don't click links and don't open these attachments. This is an example of a phishing email. We've shown this before, but I thought it was worth it to leave it in here because you can see some of these things, they look legit. You've got an important message from the staff portal, and it looks like it's coming from a legit person here at UNF. I mean, you know, in a weak moment, somebody might click on this not thinking about it, and that's all it takes. So you've got to be hyper vigilant when it comes to these things. But what can you do about it? Well, the first thing is the ounce of prevention. So you've got to patch your computers. I can't stress this enough. If your computers aren't being patched, they're going to be vulnerable to more and more attacks the longer you go without patching. And it's worth mentioning that, especially with Windows, you have to reboot after a lot of patches. And Windows will tell you, most of the time any computer will tell you if it needs to reboot for patches. But it's important to do that as soon as you're prompted to do it. Because if you don't, then your computer's not completely patched and it may still be vulnerable to whatever the vulnerability was. Which means, you know, you installed this patch, but then you go out on the internet, you go crawling around, somebody attacks you, and if you didn't reboot and that patch needed it, well, the attack might just still work. So you didn't do any good. So you got to make sure you reboot when your computer tells you it needs to. The other thing with email attachments, I can't stand up here and say don't open email attachments. They're a fact of life. We all get them and we all send them. But what you can do is, instead of just opening them up, download them, save them to your computer, and then scan them with whatever antivirus programs on your computer. Here on campus, we use semantic endpoint protection. At home, you'll have Windows Defender or something else. But it's always a good idea to scan documents before you open them, especially Office documents and PDFs, because those are notorious vectors for malware. Only install the updates from trusted sources. I mentioned this a little earlier on a slide a couple slides ago. If you go to a random website and it tells you to install something other than that you're not expecting, then it's probably bogus and you should avoid it. Again, I'll use the Flash example. If you go to a website and it says your Flash player is out of date, well, on most modern browsers, they keep the Flash player up to date by themselves. But if you're not sure, go to Adobe and try to download Flash and install it. Don't just trust the one from the website. The other thing, and this one is a personal thing for me because it happened to some people I know several times repeatedly. They trusted the first hit on Google, and you can't do that. You got to look at the link and see, is it really what I'm trying to download? So in this picture I've got over here on the side of the slide, we're trying to download VLC. So we Googled VLC. Well, the first hit came from kickdownloads.com/VLC. That doesn't look legit. The next one is install-file.com VLC media player. That doesn't look legit. But the third one down is videoland.org VLC. That's the actual page. Odds are pretty good that these two above it, that they're sending out infected copies of the software. And again, you download that, you install it, well, you did all the work for the attacker. Now they've got whatever they want to put on your system. So the other side of it, let's say you've gotten ransomware. What are you going to do? Well, there's really only one solution for it, and that's to wipe the computer and restore from backups. This is the pound of cure. Right? So the ounce of prevention will help you avoid it, but if it happens, you just got to take the medicine on it because there's not much else you can do. So you got to create a good backup strategy to prepare for it. You have to stick with it. You can't just back up once and assume you're good forever. I don't know about y'all, but when I take a vacation, I take a lot of pictures, and I don't want to lose them. And if I don't back up after I take those pictures, then something happens. They're just gone. The other big thing is to automate whatever you can, because if you can automate it, then you don't have to think about it, and it just takes care of itself, and that's an awesome thing to have. You can do that a lot with the cloud providers that we'll talk about here in a little bit, but there's also ways that you can automate things for yourself on your local computer, which I'll talk about a little bit more later here. So I talk about a good backup strategy. Well, what makes a good backup strategy? Well, the first thing is I stumbled across this name for what I ultimately had been doing, and I really like it. It's called the 3-2-1 system. Basically, it means you keep 3 copies of any of your data, any file, any picture, Word document, whatever. You keep 2 copies on site, so one of them's on your computer that you're actually using. The next one might be in an external hard disk, and then you keep another copy somewhere off-site. Off-site could be in the cloud, could be in a safe deposit box on an external hard drive there, could be at your mom's house. Doesn't really matter, just as long as it's not in the same location. The reason for this is what happens if your house catches fire and burns down. Well, if you have an offsite backup, the data is safe because it was over at another location. The other side of the offset backup story is sometimes it's nice to have that other location be a great distance away, maybe in another city, because what happens if, your house and your relative's house gets flooded? Well, the data could be lost in that situation, but hopefully not. So I talk here about cloud backup providers versus using a safe deposit box and using your mom's house. Basically, they all have their benefits and they all have their drawbacks. So for the cloud, you've got convenience because it's always there. You can always get to it. It's usually pretty foolproof. They usually have an app or something that you either tell it what you want to back up, or it just automatically knows to go after your user folders and whatnot. You don't have to buy anything. There's nothing for you to maintain. You just got to keep the app installed and make sure that it can connect to the internet. And then most of the vendors encrypt the data at rest. And I'm going to talk more about encryption a little bit later, but that's a big deal because especially when you go to the cloud, you don't want your data to be sitting there unencrypted, because what happens if the cloud vendor gets breached? Well, if the data is unencrypted, then whoever breached them could theoretically access it. So you want your data to be encrypted. Some downsides to it, it's expensive. I won't lie. The research I was doing for this presentation, one computer is not too bad. It's usually $50, $60 a year, depending on the service you pick. You start going beyond that, and it gets expensive pretty quickly. Second one is, the data is not under your control. You're at the mercy of that vendor and their terms of service. So, if they decide, well, you can only upload at 56K, well, then it's going to take you a long time to upload a lot of pictures. That's just how it goes. Some of the vendors won't let you protect your password encryption, won't let you password protect your encryption key. This is one of those things that's nice to have. I wouldn't say it's a deal breaker for a particular service or not. I would look for this because even if they encrypt your data, if you cannot encrypt the key that was used to encrypt the data, technically the vendor would have the ability to decrypt your data. Why is that important? Well, if they are served with, some sort of a court order that says, hey, give us the data that's in this person's account, technically they would be able to dump your clear text data and give it away. It's two sides of that argument in terms of visibility and privacy. If you're able to password protect your encryption key, then they can give them the data, but it would just be encrypted data. They wouldn't be able to decrypt it because you would have to unlock the key to decrypt it for them. And the other side of a cloud service is, if you don't have a fast internet connection, it could take a while, especially initially, to do your backups. Also, if you have data that comes in big bursts, like 1,000 vacation pictures in one day, it's going to take a little while to get all that stuff backed up. It'll still do it, but it might take a little longer. Going to a safe deposit box, that's about as private as you can get, because without using a drill, nobody can get into your box without you there, or at least without the key. Banks are usually pretty well protected against robbery and weather, so it's unlikely that a hurricane is going to blow your bank's vault down. They're usually pretty cheap in terms of monthly or annual cost. I think my safe deposit box costs me $40 a year. It's not that bad, but it's big, and I can keep a lot more than just a hard drive in there. Especially if you have multiple devices, that's a real big saver because you can put multiple drives in there, whatnot. You control the encryption. You decide what gets encrypted and how, and you don't have to rely on some other vendor's decisions on what is secure enough. Downside, it can be a hassle driving back and forth to the bank. There's no way to get around that. You have to go during banker's hours, and we all know how flexible banks are about their business hours. You're responsible for the drives, so if you have a drive go bad, that's on you. But the whole point of this strategy is that you've got multiple copies, so even if a drive does go bad, you've still got it somewhere else. There is a small fee, but you still have to pay to store them. Like I said, your bank is hardened against theft and catastrophic weather. And I know I mentioned that you control the encryption. Well, you have to do the encryption. It's not necessarily difficult, but for someone who's less tech savvy, it could be a hurdle that they may not want to tackle. So then you have the last option, which would be storing it at mom's. And this one, it has one benefit the others will never have, and that's mom usually tries to feed me when I go to her house, and that's not ever a bad thing. But, you know, on the other hand, sometimes she won't let you leave unless you eat, and you're just not hungry, so that creates a problem. But what pros and cons, you got to weigh them. In all honesty, though, it's the least expensive option because you don't have to pay to leave it there, I would assume. Reasonably private. It's unlikely your relatives are going to go digging through your files. And, you know, you visit your mom all the time, right? So you're always going over there. So it's convenient. Downsides would be, you know, a house is going to be less hardened than a bank. And it'll certainly be less hardened than a cloud-based service against, you know, storms and fires and catastrophic damage like that. There is a chance that somebody will move your drive and it will be misplaced. I'm not going to name any names here, but there's a certain person in my family who has never put something down in the same place they picked it up. So there's a chance that in a cleaning binge it might get misplaced, but at least you know it probably didn't leave the building. Again, you're responsible for buying the drives and you have to do your own encryption. So at this point, I would recommend the safe deposit box over staying at your mom's house, or any other relative. But you know, it's an option if you don't want to deal with the bank. So here's what I usually recommend for most people in terms of a backup strategy. I keep 1 or 2 external hard drives. One of them I keep next to the computer unplugged. And the reason I keep it unplugged is because most of the ransomware that I've seen will basically scan your computer for any drives that are attached, and it will encrypt those as well. So just because you have an external hard drive connected and you're making backups to it, doesn't mean that the data is safe there, because if that ransomware can see the data, it'll encrypt it there too. So I keep it disconnected except when I'm going to actively make a backup. I keep another one in a safe location away from home, or I would recommend you keep another one in a safe location away from home. This could be subscribing to a cloud service like Backblaze, Carbonite. I'm not as big a fan of using Dropbox for backups. They're really good at syncing files across different devices, but their business is not doing backups, so they don't have some of the support structure in place that I'll talk about in just a minute. But here is what I actually do. This is just me. Take it with a grain of salt. I have 3 external drives. I keep one on my desk that I back up to nightly or thereabouts. Some days I don't turn the computer on, and if I don't, I won't back it up. I keep another drive that I update roughly monthly in my safe at the house. The safe's got, I think it's a 4-hour fire rating, so even if the house burns down, it's pretty likely that the drive will be okay. And then I keep one in my safe deposit box that I rotate every 2 or 3 months, or whenever I have a big influx of data like vacation pictures. So the encryption. I don't encrypt everything because, quite frankly, if somebody wants to look at the pictures of me on vacation, more power to them. But I do encrypt the important stuff like financial records and, you know, credit reports, medical records, banking, tax returns, all that kind of stuff that you wouldn't want to get out on the internet. I encrypt that stuff. Encrypting your backups is a good plan. There's tools out there like VeraCrypt on the internet. It's free. It's relatively easy to use. And what it'll let you do here, you can see in the picture, the option highlighted is to create an encrypted file container. And basically that takes a file and it turns it into a box. And you can put other files into that box, and then those files are encrypted when they're in that box. So the nice thing about doing that is if you put them into that container and then you close the container, everything in it is encrypted. So when you do your regular backups, you just make sure you back up that container and everything's encrypted already. You don't have to go back to the backup and say, okay, I want to encrypt these files or whatever. It's just done. It's there. It's ready to go. So that's the way I like to do it and to go about it. The key points that we want to take away from this are you want to make sure that you patch your computers. Install your patches as soon as they come out. Don't just think operating system patches. Keep an eye out for other patches like Java, your browsers, Flash if you still have it, other things like that. Everything, almost every piece of software on your computer is going to get patched eventually. Keep an eye out for them. And when they tell you they need to reboot to install it, reboot as soon as you're able to do it, because you want to get that protection. You want to make sure you back up your files to multiple places. Don't just trust that the hard drive on your desk is good enough. What happens if somebody breaks into your house and steals your computer and the hard drive? Well, you just lost everything. Well, okay, great, so I won't keep it by the desk. Well, what happens if your house floods or burns down? Well, unless it was in the attic, it's probably not going to be there when you go back. Cloud services can go away. I mean, there's already been some shifting in this marketplace over the last 5 or 6 years. Some new companies have come out, some have gone away. Just be aware that the company you select might not be there in 10 years. Now, they'll usually get absorbed by somebody and have a way for you to get your data, but there is a good chance that might not happen. Banks are not invulnerable either. There's always the risk that somebody will break in and pick your box and drill in and take the locks out and take your hard drives. But the best thing to keep in mind though is that even if your backups are not completely current, any backup is better than no backup at all. So I know I said you got to make sure and stay on top of it, and that's true. But even if you just do it once, if your computer was to die 6 months from now, wouldn't you rather only lose 6 months of memories and pictures and videos rather than the last 5-10 years? I mean, it's pretty clear that doing backups is an important thing. So these are the couple of products that I have looked at personally. Backblaze and Carbonite are cloud backup providers. They both seem reasonable. Their prices are pretty much the same. You just kind of have to select one and then go with it. VeraCrypt, here's the link here for you to download that if you want to encrypt stuff. And you can also encrypt things before they get sent up there. Talking about Backblaze and Carbonite, the one thing that I did notice that's different between the two is that Backblaze does let you encrypt or password protect your encryption key, and Carbonite does not seem to do that from anything I could find. So in that regard, Backblaze could be a little bit more secure. The reason I would suggest Backblaze or Carbonite or one of the proper backup services over using OneDrive or Google Drive or Dropbox is because these services can back up your entire computer, not just files, if you want. They can also have some other services to help you with restoration, which Dropbox and services like that aren't there to do. It's just not part of their business model because they're not really a backup company. So, for instance, with Backblaze or Carbonite, you can pay a fee if you ever have to do a mass restoration from your computer because you've lost everything, and they'll send you a hard drive with all of your data on it, ready to go. You just copy it back. Some of these providers, and there's others on the internet, some of them will actually take full images of your computer. So if your computer was, let's say the hard drive failed, you could actually call them up and they'll send you a full image of your computer and some software to lay that down on a new drive, and then your computer will be just like it was when that image was taken. So it can save a lot of time in rebuilding your computer. That's another thing that Dropbox and OneDrive and all those can't do for you. So basically, like I said, the key takeaways are take backups, stick with a plan, and try to keep your computers patched, and always question attachments. Doesn't matter who they come from. because 9 times out of 10, that's probably what's going to get you. So, anybody have any questions?